So Dylan, excuse me, will there be questions coming in through Facebook? I don't know if I'll be able to see those. I can see the ones that come up in the chat here.
Yeah, we'll take care of that. So we're going to get things started. And so we're now live on Facebook, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. And my name is Dylan Yates, and I'm the president of Cape Breton Environmental Association. And for those of you who don't know, we are an environmental organization based in Glace Bay. And our primary focus right now is on the marine debris issue and community cleanups, but we also offer workshops and other environmental activities throughout Cape Breton, particularly with the youth. And we have Kathleen Martin with us this evening from the Canadian Sea Turtle Network. And Kathleen is going to be talking with us about the leatherback sea turtle and sea turtle conservation. And just before we get things handed over to Kathleen, I'm going to ask Victoria, one of the co-hosts this evening, to do a land acknowledgement for us, and I'll pass that over to her.
Yeah, I'd love to. So we would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. As such, we are all treaty people. And with that, I guess we'll welcome to everybody and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for that, Victoria. So yeah, Karen, or Kathleen, sorry, we'll get things started, and can introduce yourself and start with your presentation.
Great, thank you. My name is Kathleen Martin. I'm so pleased to have been invited here tonight to chat with you about sea turtles. But before I get started, just wanted to say Dylan had been running me through just before we all met tonight and showing me some of the work that you do as part of your organization to clear marine debris out of the ocean. And I just wanted to say what a big deal that is and how grateful I am to you for all of that work. Often people will talk about picking up garbage along the seashore and you just picture like a plastic garbage bag full of stuff. And then he just showed me pictures of trucks, you know, filled with traps and ghost gear. And those are things that are so dangerous for animals like leatherback turtles. So you're making an absolute difference to the survival of the species off our coast. And I'm really, truly grateful to you. So thank you for that. I'm going to start off. I thought what I'd do is I'd run a little slideshow for you and talk a little bit about the history of sea turtles in Canada and a little bit of the biology of sea turtles that we find here, and to talk a bit as well about some of the things that you're seeing in the news or potentially have seen in the news about the mass cold stunning event that's taking place in Texas as we speak, and talk a little bit about how that affects us in Canada as well. So I think I'll just share my screen and get started. So I'll run through some slides and I'll toggle back and forth a little bit because I always have some specimens handy. So I'll show you a few things just to give you a sense of things for scale and things like that. So I'm just gonna share my screen. And we'll begin talking first about leatherback sea turtles, which are the turtles that we work with the most. There are 4 species of sea turtles that we find in Canadian waters: the leatherback, the loggerhead sea turtle, green sea turtles, and Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. But the turtle that started it all, certainly for us, was a leatherback sea turtle. And this is one of my favorite pictures. It's a very old one of a leatherback. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what is so beautiful about this picture. It was taken off our field boat, actually off Neils Harbor, which is northern Cape Breton. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So not far from where you guys are. And it's a wonderful thing that it's a picture that shows you exactly what makes a leatherback. So you can see that unlike other sea turtles, leatherbacks don't have traditional shells. So not what you'd expect with kind of scutes and a hard bony shell. Instead, they have this leathery skin that covers their carapace or their top shell and has 7 ridges that run the length of it, which you can see really beautifully in this picture. And this beautiful, huge, these big, long flippers that are almost the length of their body that they use. And honestly, when you watch them swimming in the ocean, it looks almost as though they're flying. They make these really kind of bird-like movements as they're swimming. And then you can also see on the top of its head, there's a little pink spot that's there, which you can see. And that's occurs in every leatherback turtle in varying degrees. So you'll get small pink spots and big pink spots, and some of the spots look more orange than pink, but every turtle has it, and it's the light, or every leatherback turtle has it, and it's the lightest spot on a very dark bodied animal. And what's interesting about that is we're not exactly sure what it's used for, but it covers something called the pineal gland, which is used in other animals for migration. So there's a hypothesis that exists that suggests that what leatherbacks do, how they find their place in a vast kind of featureless ocean devoid of any traffic signals, is they somehow sense the trajectory of the light and figure out where they are in the globe that way. Just gonna play, this is a video that was also shot off Niels Harbor, so you get a chance to see what a leatherback looks like swimming underwater. And again, you can see those beautiful long ridges, and you can catch sight of that pink spot. They often have commensals or turtle or animals, there's fish that swim along or attach themselves to their body and feed off all the algae that grows on their shells. You can see that kind of flying look. They're one of the deepest diving reptiles that can dive deeper than 1 kilometer into the water, into the ocean, and they can hold their breath for more than an hour underwater. And in this one, you can see this one's got a big jellyfish kind of hanging out of its mouth. I don't know if you can see that stripe right along there. And it's popping up up out of the water just to take a quick breath. This is a really old photograph that was taken by a scientist called Sherman Bleakney, and it's a really fascinating one. It's a picture of the front flipper of a leatherback turtle, and it's being compared with the arm of an adult male. And I mean, it's great to show scale because leatherbacks are enormously big. But one of the fascinating things that Dr. Bleakney would have told you, Sherman would have told you, is that if you look at the bone structure of the human hand and you look at the bone structure of the flipper of a leatherback turtle, they're precisely the same. The bone placement, the number of bones, and where the bones are placed mirror one another exactly. And which is a really kind of interesting evolutionary fact, and also gives you a really good sense when you're looking at leatherbacks swimming in the water, how it looks like they kind of make a very small flick of their pinky finger and they can change trajectory. If you've ever seen them laying eggs in the sand when they're digging their nests, they use their rear flippers, but the same idea. They have incredible dexterity as well, which is partially due to all of the things that all the bones and the structure of the bones underneath their flipper. This is just to give you a sense of size. So leatherback's one of the largest reptiles in the world. We're in a big race with the saltwater crocodile. We are bigger, we think, because we're also heavier. Saltwater crocodiles are longer, but anyway, they are one of the largest reptiles, and they can grow their carapace, so just their top shell can grow to be almost 2 meters in length. So you get a sense of the size of the animal there. And this is same idea, right? This gives you a sense of the variety of sizes that we see. This turtle that you're looking at now at a carapace length of just the top shell of about 174 centimeters. And it was the longest, or the largest leatherback. The largest leatherback that we'd worked with. So they're enormously big. So they do come bigger than this off our coast, but we have to be able to work with them safely at sea. So that limits as well how big the animals are that we can try and board on our boat. The leatherbacks start their lives in the ones that we see off the coast of Atlantic Canada start their lives in South and Central America. They hatch on nesting beaches, and the sea turtles nest. Typically, this is an adult female sea turtle. She's laying an egg. She's laying her eggs in French Guiana. This is an unusual photo. Typically, the leatherbacks lay their nests at night, but this is what we call a dawn nester, which means that she would have started laying her eggs around 3 or 4 in the morning when it was still dark, and then would be continuing to finish that process, which takes about 2 hours as the light broke. But it's a beautiful shot. I love it. It's actually quite an old photo. It's probably about 20 years old, but I've never seen one that's quite as lovely to show this. What you can see sometimes with leatherbacks, which are these really incredibly polka dotted turtles with these, looks like a paintbrush splotches all over it. We don't tend to see that expressed as often in the turtles that we see up here. And I don't know if it's a function of the nesting process, or a function of how warm, how they are affected by being warmer than they are when they're up where we are. Littler turtles tend to be more polka dotted, but are the younger ones. But I think this one's so beautiful. This is a more typical shot of a leatherback at night. And I just love it because I think their faces are so lovely and charming. So they lay their eggs. About 60 days later, the mother, after she lays her eggs, the female leatherback will return to the ocean, and she won't come back to land again until she's going to lay a nest, another nest. And so what happens with the female leatherbacks is they nest, but not every year. So they nest every 2 to 3 years. And during a nesting year, they'll nest in the Atlantic about 6 to 8 times, but as many as 12. So there's a range, obviously. And so they'll lay a clutch of eggs. Then they'll head back into the ocean. 2 weeks later, about 10 days to 2 weeks later, they'll come back and lay another one, and they'll do that several times in their nesting year. And then they'll not come back for another 2 to 3 years. And after they've laid their nest, they don't parent their young, so they're asocial. They don't take care of their babies. So they'll lay the nest. About 60 days later, the nest will hatch, and the little baby, very adorable turtles will rush out onto land. You've probably seen pictures of this, and they are really tiny when you first see them. They weigh about as much as a Kit Kat bar, a chocolate bar. They can fit in the palm of your hand, and you've seen probably footage of them scurrying off into the ocean. And I'll just show you a little bit. This is interesting to me. This turtle is trying to make its way, this little hatchling leatherback turtle. This is in the beach in Trinidad over a lot of sargassum, which is washed up. And that's interesting because since the BP oil spill, we've been seeing an increased amount of sargassum. So the last time I was in Trinidad, that beach was absolutely packed full of sargassum. I was walking on sargassum that was probably 2 to 3 feet thick. And that's been a real issue for these animals. Really difficult because, of course, if you looked at that little turtle that we just saw, trying to climb over it in order to get to the ocean is really tricky. And then also being able to nest or lay eggs in that environment is almost impossible. So it's been a deterrent. And it's since the BP oil spill, they think, although it hasn't been confirmed as they haven't scientifically confirmed the connections, again, a hypothesis that there was a cleaning fluid, some of the cleaners that they used to clean up the spill, the cleaning agent led to a bloom in sargassum. So it's been an issue, I'd say, for the last 5 or 6 years. This is a beach in Matura Beach in Trinidad. This is what a typical kind of leatherback turtle nesting beach would look like. And what happens after the turtles, so the turtles hatch, they go into the water. We don't see them again until they're mature. And we never see the male turtles again. So once they go into the ocean, those animals are pelagic for the rest of their lives, which means they don't come to shore. They just swim. And the female turtles only come to shore when they're old enough and mature enough to lay an egg, to lay eggs, to nest. We don't know what happens to the little turtles. It's something that's being studied and has been studied for years. We don't have a lot of information on what happens to the small leatherback turtles. The time between when you can hold them in your hand until they're about 1 meter and a bit carapace length is known as the lost years. So we don't know what the animals do during that time until we see them again, and they're a lot larger. And actually, one of the interesting things about the Canadian project is we were some of the first people to actually study subadult sea turtles, to be able to see sea turtles that were of smaller size. This is the coastline, actually, of Neils Harbor. And it begs the question, what are leatherbacks that hatch on gorgeous and nesting beaches in the tropics doing up on the shores of Cape Breton Island or off the shores of Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia? In fact, what are any of us doing up in Nova Scotia when we could be somewhere warmer, particularly with the weather that's coming? Anyway, that was a really big question. And for a long time, scientists didn't think that sea turtles came to Canadian waters on purpose. They thought that any turtles that were found here were here by mistake, that somehow they were lost, which is, of course, such a human idea, a human construct being lost, and not typically something that happens to an animal. But anyway, there was a scientist called Sherman Bleakney, which I mentioned him before with the photograph of the bones of the flipper and the human hand. And this is a picture of Sherman here and his family Volvo. And he was the head of the biology department at Acadia University. He passed away just over a year ago and was one of the most remarkable people I've ever known in my life. And he was an incredibly curious scientist, and he studied anatomy, and he was fascinated by leatherback turtles. And he was hearing about them washing up or being found off of the southwest shore of Nova Scotia. And so he made friends with some fishermen and said, if you happen to see these animals, if you find them dead, can you bring them to me? I'd like to learn about them. And so he began collecting the carcasses of dead leatherback turtles. Fishermen would bring them in for him, and he would haul them up to Wolfville, which is off, as you know, in the quite a ways from Halifax, and he'd haul him up in the back of his family Volvo. And so I'd like to take always a moment to remember his wife and his kids who spent time in that Volvo, with no doubt the smell of dead leatherback permeating the upholstery for years. Anyway, he would bring them to a farm up in the South Mountain in the Annapolis Valley, and his friend would let him do necropsies there. And by doing those necropsies, he would learn all kinds of things about the leatherback turtles. And he posited that the turtles were here on purpose, and he believed that they were here. He cut them open and he looked at what their stomach contents were, and he believed that they were here feeding on jellyfish, and that they'd come all this way to eat. He also always used to make the joke, which I thought was so funny. After he was done with the carcasses, he would leave them off in the fields to kind of, be eaten away by other animals, to be fed on by animals. And he said someday people are going to come and find the bones of leatherback turtles way up on this mountain and ascertain that maybe, or surmise that maybe sea level used to be much, much higher. Anyway, what happened to Sherman was he had this amazing idea about leatherback turtles, and no one believed him. And he couldn't get funded. He couldn't find funding that would support him studying this animal. And so he set it aside, and he became actually a global expert on the sea slug. And one time he said to me quite famously, "Kathleen, you think it's hard to raise money to study the leatherback turtle. Imagine how hard it's been for me to raise money to try and convince people to support the sea slug." So it's one of my favorite Sherman moments. But what happened afterwards was 30 years after Sherman had first proposed this idea, we helped to pick up on his research. Mike James and I helped pick up on his research and his whole idea of talking to fishermen to see if indeed leatherback turtles were found with any regularity off the coast of Nova Scotia, again, to try and broaden the scientific understanding of why these animals were being found here at all. And so we talked to fishermen. We went to fishing wharves across the province, and across actually Atlantic Canada, but particularly in Nova Scotia, because that's where we lived, and put up posters that said, "Have you seen this turtle?" and asked fishermen to call us. We do the same thing every year these days. And we've been doing it for almost 22 or 23 years now, 23 summers. And the idea was to ask fishermen if they could contribute sightings. We wanted to know the latitude and longitude where they saw the turtles, and if they could take photographs of those animals for us, we really would appreciate it. And one of the best things you can ever say to a fisherman in Nova Scotia is, scientists don't think that something's there that they really know to be there. So the fishermen were quite interested in disproving the scientists who had said the turtles that they saw on a regular basis weren't there. And so in one summer, so there had been 70 records of leatherback sea turtles formally recorded in all of Atlantic Canada until 1997. And then in the summer of 1998, with the help of commercial fishermen, we recorded more than 171. And again, in the next summer, a significant number, and within 2 years had been able to prove entirely with the help of the fishermen of Atlantic Canada that leatherback turtles were coming to Canadian waters on a routine basis in great numbers. And that indeed Sherman Bleakney had been right in everything actually that he had suggested in a paper he published in 1964, and that indeed science and what we had thought about turtles had been wrong. And to put this in perspective, leatherbacks have been on Earth for more than 150 million years. They've been here. When T-Rex was roaming the land, leatherback turtles were swimming in the ocean. And it was the citizen science and the effort of local people doing the thing in front of them, right? The environmental question in front of them, taking the time to write down a latitude and longitude, to snap a picture, to pick up a phone and to call us. And they changed the global understanding of a dinosaur. And that is just never fails to impress me, and to, I find it one of the most remarkable things. And this picture shows what some of those sightings were. So all the little yellow dots are some sightings that have been sent to us by fishermen over the years. And one of the things that happens, of course, I mean, you can see how plentiful they are. This, of course, isn't all the sightings. We've had thousands by this point, but it just gives you an idea. But one of the things it tells us is both where leatherbacks are, but also where fishermen are, right? Because the people have to be there to see the turtles. So there is always a bias in that type of observer information. And so we had to also look at where the turtles were going. And so we wanted the turtles to tell us where they were going. So we used satellite technology to do that, and put a satellite transmitter on the back of a leatherback turtle and let the turtle tell us what it was doing. And this is the first satellite track of a return migration of a sea turtle ever, actually, in the world, this one. So the interesting thing about putting a satellite pack on the back of a leatherback was that people were doing this type of work on nesting beaches, but no one had ever been able to figure out how to do it in the ocean, because it's really hard to work with a large, a large endangered species. First of all, to find them, but second of all, also to be able to manage to work safely with them at sea. And we were able to do that, and we're able to be the first in the world to do that because we worked with commercial fishermen, because there's no one who knows better how to work with large animals at sea than fishermen, and particularly Nova Scotia fishermen. And the people who did the lion's share of the work in this were fishermen from off Cape Breton up in Niels Harbor. Really brilliant scientists and fishermen. They were just the most amazing people, and really made this work possible. So, and also, of course, we had help. We have another field site off of Southwest Nova Scotia, and amazing help there too. But a lot of the really ingenious stuff came from Niels Harbor. So this shows the return migration of a leatherback turtle, and you can see it going all the way down. This one was coming from Trinidad all the way up and around. Or we tagged it up here, but it went all the way down and hit the nesting beach in Trinidad, and then came all the way back up again. And it would take, they do this within the course of a year. So this is a great map for a lot of reasons. So every red piece of spaghetti line that you see on there represents the track that we have of the satellite track of a leatherback turtle. And what's so interesting to me was scientists, once they kind of said, okay, we agree that, you've shown us that leatherback turtles do exist in Canadian waters. What they really wanted was a migratory corridor, because migratory corridors are things scientists love because it makes things nice and easy to protect, right? If we can put a marine protected area around it, then we can make sure everything's okay and we can keep that animal safe. And so they had said, well, if they're in Nova Scotia waters on purpose, they must be getting there through a migratory corridor. So when we had just a couple of tracks, that they could kind of try and work with that. But when we really started to fill in with a number of tracks, what we realized is leatherbacks use all the ocean in their tracks, in the way that they use the water. You can't marine protected area a leatherback sea turtle. Their migratory range is just too big as a species. So I love this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I love the kind of freedom of it. I love how they use the breadth of ocean. And then I also love that it reminds me of how uncontrollable really a lot of nature is, and that our desire to kind of keep it safe and be able to check off a box that we've fixed this issue. This, it really, I think, keeps us all humble in a really good way. This slide shows you how the leatherback turtles are using the waters around Nova Scotia. So in Atlantic Canada, excuse me. Every place where there's a color, a turtle has been, and the warmer the color is, the more often you find those animals. So you're going to see off your area, off northern Cape Breton into the Gulf. Those are really high use areas for leatherbacks. We see them in this area an awful lot, and particularly coming up and through here. The question, of course, is what are they doing here? And as Sherman had posited, Dr. Bleakney had posited so many years ago, they're here feeding on jellyfish, the principal prey of the leatherback turtle. So the leatherback turtle grows from something the size of my hand to something 2 meters in length that weighs routinely over 1,000 pounds, feeding on jellyfish. And the jellyfish off the coast of Nova Scotia, we have the large jellyfish buffet here, and leatherbacks eat them. So you can see here, this is a lion's mane jellyfish, and the big jellyfish tentacles streaming out of the mouth of the leatherback as it swims. What's cool about, there are lots of cool things about leatherbacks. One of the cool things is how they don't have it, like all turtles, they don't have any teeth, but what they do have are these spines, these really sharp spines that line their esophagus all the way down into their stomach. And they shred the jellyfish on the way down. They're quite incredible to see. That's what they look like, freshly cut off a dead turtle, for those of you who aren't squeamish. And as I said, they shred the jellyfish on their way down. And I'm going to just show you, this is a video that we shot using a critter cam that Mike James developed with some engineers in Halifax. And it shows you, let me see, one sec. Oh, it's not allowing me. How can I do this? Sorry. It's showing you a leatherback turtle feeding on jellyfish. So you can see the pink spot on the leatherback turtle's head there, just to get your perspective, and you can see it eating lion's mane jellyfish. So one of the things that was really interesting to us is that we knew the turtles were eating jellyfish, but we couldn't see the jellyfish at the surface. And so we managed to figure out how to get this camera to work and to be able to shoot footage underwater of a leatherback eating. Suddenly we saw this incredible conveyor belt of jellyfish. This is still in the photic zone. This is still in the top meters of the water column. And it's just one jellyfish after another that the turtle eats. And I love watching this because first of all, there's a ton of jellyfish gore, which is kind of neat, but also how many jellyfish come along in the space of just a minute. See, another one's just coming up. And then what I like too is when they are not quite finished one, and then they see another one and how fast they start to chew. They're like, yum, kind of like Pac-Man. You see it chewing faster and faster and faster. But it never lets one go by. And that work showed us what Mike, James, and his colleagues were able to figure out was that leatherbacks eat more than their body weight in jellyfish a day. So at least their body weight in jellyfish when they're off in Atlantic Canada. That means that each leatherback that's here is vacuuming out about 1,000 pounds of jellyfish out of our ecosystem every day, out of our marine ecosystem. And that's really an important thing to keep in mind, because a jellyfish heavy ecosystem, so an ecosystem where there are a lot of jellyfish, is never a healthy ecosystem. It's jellyfish eat larval fish, they eat everything, they kind of kill all the things. And so it's really critical that they're in balance. So leatherbacks are doing a huge service for us in the water here. I like this photo. So this is a picture, and you can see all the kind of pieces of jellyfish floating in the water. And when they talk about the issue with turtles and marine plastic, and you often get the sense of like a turtle eating a plastic bag, and how does that work? It looks kind of like a floating jellyfish, but actually, you know, the issue of plastics in the water, and you know, given the work that you've done, I'm sure know this very well, isn't always that it's kind of a large plastic bag that's floating around. That's rarely the issue, actually. The bigger issue is that when plastic is left out for even a short while, and it has the, you know, wave action working on it, as well as UV making it brittle, it tends to break up into pieces. And if you think about what that would look like, you can see why kind of pieces of jellyfish, which would be absolutely safe for a leatherback to eat, would mimic pieces of plastic that they shouldn't. This is a picture of a leatherback on a beach in French Guiana. And one of the things that's really interesting to me here, and to want you to keep an eye on in this particular photo, is how sharp those ridges are along its back. So you can kind of see that. This is that same turtle. We found that same turtle on our boat just a few months later. And you can see how big and fat it is. So these turtles, we used to be able to see at the beginning of the year, you'd see kind of a skinnier turtle show up. And as we began to work, kind of to do our field work through July and August, you start to see these super fat sea turtles. The turtles come and they become enormously big. They grow by 33%. They gain 33% of their body weight, or additional body weight, up in Nova Scotia. They come and they just get fatter and fatter and fatter. I love this picture. It's a little blurry, but you can just see like that. If you look at the comparison, it's like the shell only gives it so much space to gain, you know, extra body fat. And then it gets as much as it can in its neck. And then it's kind of restricted again by its skull, but they get incredibly big here. It's one of the most important feeding places for leatherback turtles in the world, is off the coast of Nova Scotia and the rest of Atlantic Canada. We find turtles here. So what's important is we're actually the UN of sea turtles up here, because we get turtles from all over the Western Atlantic nesting assemblage of sea turtles. So all the leatherbacks that you find in the Western Atlantic are coming up to Nova Scotia to feed, or waters off the coast of Nova Scotia to feed, in Atlantic Canada to feed on jellyfish. So, you know, if something with an endangered species, that's really important, because if something happens, for example, to Costa Rica and it wipes out all of their, you know, if we look at what's happening in Texas, it wipes out all of that kind of population, which is a really big deal in that area. What you've lost is, for example, the turtles of Costa Rica, right? Which is a big deal. But if you wipe out the turtles off the coast of Atlantic Canada, you wipe off everybody's turtles, because we're getting them from countries throughout South and Central America. The largest contributor to our population of sea turtles in Canada that we found is Trinidad, and they provide about 60% of the turtles that we have in Nova Scotia come from Trinidad, with French Guiana being the next. We identify where they're from using things like satellite tags. So the satellite, you know, will be able to follow the turtles to nesting beaches. We take DNA samples, and the DNA sample, because with sea turtles, often the turtles will return to the same region, and some species to exactly the same beach precisely where they hatched. You can look at the matrilineal DNA and you can identify groups of sisters effectively. So you can identify where in the world a leatherback turtle or a sea turtle is from by looking at their mDNA. And we can also do it in a really simple way, which is looking at flipper tags. So we put tags, almost like a catalier tag, on the flippers of sea turtles. They have a number on them, and on the back they have an address. This one's from Trinidad. I can tell because it starts with a T. Ours start with a CAN for Canada, and you can find out where turtles are from that way. This is a turtle, and we're just looking at, you know, one of the really most exciting things about the work we do is that it's so international. So when we're talking about conserving turtles in Canada, we're actually talking about conserving them internationally, because the same turtles that we find in Canadian waters also appear in Trinidad, as I've said. And in this case, this was a turtle called Red Roquette. And she went down to a nesting beach in Colombia. And this is her with Edwin Gonzalez, who was the person who found her on the beach, taking her satellite transmitter off. And actually, I have Red Roquette satellite transmitter right here, which is so cool. It's this transmitter that I'm holding in my hand was put on Red Roquette in Nova Scotia and went with her all the way to Colombia until Edreny took it off right there, which is pretty neat because we get information from satellite transmitters. If you think about it like bandwidth, it can send really coarse information to the satellite. So where it's going, we get things like latitude and longitude and sea surface temperature and depth of dives, but just kind of basic coarse information. But if we can get the satellite transmitter back, if it's found again on the nesting beach, it can record every second of the sea turtle's life, some of them, which is pretty neat. And so it's a really big deal to get those transmitters back. And it was really neat to work with this community. This is a small community near kind of on the Gulf of Uraba, which is close to Panama. And it's a small community called Bogalito. And they were so excited to find Red Roquette on their beach because this man, the person that's sitting in the center, was one of the elders of their small community. It's an outport community of about 250 people. You can't access it easily at all. It's really hard to get to. It doesn't really have cell coverage. One of our friends had come from Colombia, had come in from Medellin. She had took her something like 18 hours to get there, both by small plane and by truck and having to walk. Anyway, at one point, there was a lot of poaching of sea turtles there. So they would kill the turtles for their shells and for their eggs. Both of which are valuable. The eggs, particularly on the black market, are considered to be aphrodisiacs and cures for a hangover. They can fetch as much as $4 US each per egg, which is a really big deal in developing economies. And this man in the middle at one point had been standing on the beach at dawn one day, and there were 7 carcasses of sea turtles lying on the beach around him. And he had this sudden feeling that they should no longer kill sea turtles, they should try and save them. And this is a big deal because it's hard, particularly in areas in countries that are rife with conflict, particularly in that area. There's a lot of narcotics work. It's a really big deal to stand up and say, I'm not going to traffic these things anymore. That's incredibly brave. And his neighboring communities were still trafficking in sea turtles, so in sea turtle parts. So, he was standing up against a huge kind of cultural piece there. And he got the community behind them, and they started this little program where they would try and track the number of sea turtles that they found and do some measurements. And suddenly these people from Canada were following this turtle that appeared on their beach. And they said to us that they felt that it had been sent, Red Roquette had been sent to them to prove that what they were doing was good and that what they had made the right decision, which was really amazing and felt great for us. And we then saw Red Roquette. She came back to nest there 2 years later, and unaccountably, we pulled her out of the water again off Cape Breton a second time. When you think of the breadth of the ocean, that we should find the same turtle twice was a really big deal. When we found her the second time and happened to catch her as part of our program the second time, she'd had an encounter with fishing gear, so we were able to take the gear off of her. And then she was seen again in Colombia. And then very surprisingly, she was found up near Digby, dead, sadly, the same turtle. And it was just amazing to me when you think again of the breadth of that ocean. If you think of that slide I showed you of all those sea turtle tracks against the ocean, the chance that we would find her, we had 4 kind of encounters with her before we found her, that she had died. It was just remarkable. And you had to feel kind of like I was like, what are you trying to say, Red Roquette? I just, it was just kind of an amazing thing. And it was really really heartbreaking for us that she was found dead. And we don't know the cause of death because by the time we kind of found her, a lot of her body was too decomposed for us to be able to determine. They did do a necropsy at the veterinary college, but to understand exactly the cause of death. There are lots of threats that leatherbacks face and lots of sea turtles face. So there's poaching, as I said, and there's marine debris like plastics, in the ocean, but there's also an awful lot of debris on nesting beaches. This is Dominican Republic. The beaches are just littered. And we see this when we're in Trinidad. A lot of the island countries don't have recycling programs, but also the world's garbage washes up on their shores, right? And, I've been on a nesting beach and watched a TV wash in. On the beach in Trinidad, there's a large freezer. It's not always just small things, but it is a lot of garbage, and it's hard to nest in that. This is a Canadian turtle found off of St. Croix. She's nesting in St. Croix, and you can see there's an oil refinery in the back here. And this is called riprap, which is it's concrete used to reinforce the shoreline around the oil refinery. And of course, it's preventing her from nesting far enough up the nesting beach that her eggs won't be inundated by the surf at high tide. So she will lay eggs there, but they won't survive. And in Canada, the primary cause of the primary threat and cause of death with sea turtles, all kinds of sea turtles, but also leatherbacks in particular, is entanglement and drowning in fishing gear, accidental entanglement and drowning in fishing gear. We also have loggerhead sea turtles, as I was mentioning earlier, is the second kind of most plentiful sea turtle that we have off the coast of Atlantic Canada. They're found further offshore. You can see a picture. That's kind of a picture of one. Obviously not in the water, but just to give you an idea of what they look like and how they're different from leatherbacks. The size of the loggerheads that we tend to see, fishermen will see really small turtles offshore. So like they'll say about the size of a dinner plate. The ones that tend to get caught in gear are of the juvenile kind of size class of loggerhead sea turtle, which means they're probably between 8 and about 15 years old. And they range in carapace length between about 41 centimeters to 80 centimeters. So those tend to be the ones that are selected by the gear. Those are the ones that are chewing on the squid and things that the fishermen offshore use to bait their hooks. So cold stunning. So as we speak, off the coast of Texas, where of course everyone knows there's been a lot of cold weather, there's been a phenomenal number of cold stunned sea turtles. And this is a phenomenon that we also see off the coast of Nova Scotia, off Atlantic Canada. And it's a really, it's not an uncommon occurrence. It's a very uncommon occurrence in Texas, where the weather is typically warmer. And in this situation, which is a very stressful one, they've had almost 4,000 sea turtles found. They're finding them, just pulling them out of the water off of the nesting beaches, or on the nesting beaches there as well. What's happened is the water temperatures dropped precipitously, and sea turtles are cold-blooded, right? They're ectotherms, which means that their body temperature is determined by the temperature of the area around them, of the ambient temperature. So they're not able to warm themselves up. Leatherbacks are a bit different. So leatherbacks are enormously big. So they have something called gigantothermy on their side, which means it's the same way that you would stay warmer outside longer than an infant would stay warmer outside, right? You have more mass to you. So leatherbacks are very big, so they can keep themselves warmer for that reason. They're dark bodied, which means that they absorb the heat from the sun and they can maintain that. But they also have a really thick layer of fat underneath their shell. They also have a really cool physiological thing called countercurrent heat exchange, which means that their arteries and their veins are bundled together so that the warm blood leaving the heart is warming up the venal blood returning to the heart. So they're actually able to maintain a body temperature above ambient temperature. So they function kind of a little bit like a mammal, even though they're still a reptile, which is really unusual. So it allows them to withstand much colder temperatures. No other species of sea turtle has that. And so these smaller sea turtles get colder faster and they can't warm themselves up. And so they become hypothermic. And we see this phenomenon. This is what's happening in Texas right now. This is, it's problematic because of course the water temperature has gotten so cold, the turtles can't adjust. And when they become hypothermic, they become lethargic, they can't lift their heads up and they will drown or get pneumonia and die of pneumonia unless they're rescued. And so the complicating factor that we're seeing in Texas is that they're rescuing them, but they don't have power. So they can't keep the spaces where they're putting the turtles indoors warm. They had just gotten a huge generator, I think it was the night before last, from SpaceX, which was really wonderful, but they're still trying to find ways to keep these animals warm. And we have this same issue here off the coast of Atlantic Canada in the fall and winter. So we run a program and it's just finished up, and it's one of my favorite things that we do, which is a beach patrol program that takes place, and you're all welcome to be part of it next year if you're interested, but it takes place between the end of October through to the end of December, beginning of January, where our volunteers walk the beaches of Atlantic Canada looking for cold stunned sea turtles. This is Lexi, a little green turtle that was found on December 3rd near St. John, New Brunswick. And the same thing, she's a cold stunned little green turtle. And I thought she was so beautiful. I love little tiny green turtles. They are just, as I said, really lovely. And this is a very kind of poignant photo because she's in the position where she's trying to keep herself warm. You can see how she's taken her flippers and she's tucked them underneath her body, which is what the turtles do when they're trying to maintain body heat. And you can see her pretty little face. So Lexi was picked up in St. John. We got a call from a member of the general public who had spoken to MARS, which I think you guys are familiar with, the Marine Animal Response Network, Stranding Network, which is a really great friend of ours and great partner of ours for the last 23 years. And the fisheries officers in New Brunswick and St. John area. And they found out about this turtle, called us, and then these two amazing fisheries officers drove all the way from St. John here. They arrived, I think it was about 1:45, and then drove all the way back home because with COVID rules, they had to get right back to New Brunswick. And they brought that little turtle to us because we had thought that she might still be alive. And the trick with cold stunned turtles is that reptiles take a really long time to die. And so turtles can breathe like once an hour, and then still potentially be resuscitated. So this is Dr. Chris Harvey Clark, who is a member of our board of directors and is also the head veterinarian at the Dalhousie University and really the expert on veterinary health of sea turtles in Canada. And he met us at midnight at Dal and put all kinds of work into trying to ascertain whether Lexi would survive or not. This is him. He does ultrasounds of the animal because the heart rate can be so slow, you just wouldn't notice a breath. And he worked on her for over an hour before we did end up pronouncing her dead, unfortunately. But if she'd been found earlier, it's possible we could have revived her. This is a really grotesque yet beautiful picture of a leatherback. And so I got in contact with you guys when Dylan was one of the people who took a photograph of the leatherback that had washed up near you guys dead. And one of the things I think is remarkable is when we find dead animals, we really want to have the chance to look at them. And what we do with the dead animals that are still not super dead, that haven't decomposed completely, is we get them to our colleagues at the vet college in Charlottetown in Prince Edward Island, and then they do a necropsy or an autopsy of those animals. And so this is the team there working on the leatherback. And what I think is so amazing is if you look at all the people in this photograph, these are all veterinaries. So this is Pierre-Yves Daou, who's the amazing wildlife veterinarian, and he's now an emeritus teacher there, and all of the vet students and vet techs and all of the people that are learning from a leatherback. Leatherback's a great teaching tool. I mean, I know this is a little bit maybe gross as a photo, but what's amazing about it, if you care about anatomy, is that leatherbacks have everything that's really big. So if you want to see what lungs look like, if you think about, we used to have to dissect frogs in biology class, you're looking at enormous lungs. You're looking at a liver that's huge. It's a really great way for students to learn. And also this gives students a chance to work on an endangered species, right? These animals are hard to find in the ocean and really hard to come by. So they get a chance to really learn from that. So you take these animals and they suddenly become, which have died, which is very sad, but then they've suddenly become this incredible way of the effect that they have is tremendous. And we do a lot of research with the people at the vet college. But I'll say we do find often the turtles that we find that are cold stunned do die. And the challenge for us, you'll see them in New England. They got huge cold stunnings every year. They had another huge number this year. They get them in the hundreds. They have an amazing sea turtle hospital down there that's linked through with the New England Aquarium and super experts down there who have always been incredibly generous with their time in helping us and consulting with Dr. Harvey Clark when we get to sea turtles. The trick for us, and Cape Cod is a really densely populated area and it's a lot of sandy beach. And so when the sea turtles are stranding there, when they're cold stunning and being thrown up on the beach because they can no longer kind of keep swimming, people find them really easily. But if you think about a beach and just think about a Nova Scotia beach, a lot of our beaches are rocky and uninhabited coastline. And so it's really hard to find those animals. It's really hard to even to differentiate them from the rocks on the beach. And so we just don't often get to them soon enough, which is why we've started this beach patrol program and have just amazing volunteers and really committed volunteers who are part of that. So most of the time we find the animals dead, but sometimes we find them alive. And so I'm going to leave you with a really happy story about a turtle that we found, which was a cold stunned. It ended up being a groggerhead, which is a cross between a green and a loggerhead, which we found out that was alive. And we wanted to get it back into warmer waters. But because of CITES or the issues that take place when you're trying to move endangered species or endangered species parts across borders, we needed to get it to New England to be released safely. We couldn't do it. It was going to take something like 6 months or 4 or 6 months before we were going to be able to move that turtle. We knew we couldn't keep it alive in our circumstances really very easily. We could do now. We've learned a lot since then, but it would have been pretty tricky. So it was actually, because we're a Commonwealth country, faster and easier to send the turtle to Bermuda. So we wrapped that turtle up and we kept it moist. You put lubricant all over their shells and their flippers to keep them nice and moist, and wrap them in warm towels and all kinds of stuff. And we slipped that guy into a cat carrier and sent it Air Canada all the way to Bermuda with a stopover in Toronto. And then it was kept at the Aquarium Museum and Zoo there in Bermuda and rehabbed. And then this is it being released back into the ocean. So if you do see sea turtles, or you do find them washed up on shore, or you want to take part in our program to find them on the beaches and to help with the cold stun sea turtles, you can always call us on our toll-free line. You're welcome to go to our website. You can always find us that way. And we would, love to hear from you whenever you see something. We got a couple of different calls about the turtle up your way, and we're never sorry to hear from people several times. It's the more often we hear about the turtles, the better, only because then we know we haven't missed any. But just before I stop chatting, I'm just going to show you a couple of things just up close, because I have them just so you can see to scale. That's a piece of the inside of that esophageal tract and the spikes on that. And then the other thing I want to show you for scale, I'll show you this too up close. This is what a leatherback's shell looks like underneath the skin. And I think it's so beautiful because it's hundreds it's thousands of little tiny pieces of bone that fit together like a beautiful mosaic or like a really complex jigsaw puzzle. And you can see this is again a Sherman Bleakney specimen, but you can see the ridge. I don't know if it's hard to see that way, but you can see it's one of the ridges. But what this does is it gives it flexibility. So when we're talking about it becoming really, really fat, that shell can expand because it's got a lot of flexibility, because it's not if you think about lifting a puzzle off of a table, it's not a solid piece. You get all the flexible pieces, but it also allows it, when it does that really deep dive, and it's diving deeper than a kilometer, it allows it to compress, right? The air pressure doesn't cause it to explode because it has that flexibility. And then the other thing I'm going to show you, just so you can get a sense of scale, is a skull from a leatherback turtle. So you can see this is I have kind of a normal sized head. So in relation to the size of my head, you can see what the skull looks like. I love this. I mean, this is a specimen for a number of reasons, but one of them is it's really great to see what the skull allows you to see a couple of different things. This is the back of it. And if you look in this hole right here, which just fits my thumb, is where the brain cavity lies for a leatherback. So leatherback turtles make these incredible migrations from Nova Scotia all the way down to South America, and they have a brain the size of your thumb, which gives you pause. It gives me pause anyway when I think about what we do with the brains that we have that are so much larger. But
All right, I think we might have lost Kathleen there. We'll see if she reconnects.
yeah, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that I don't know if you heard about the lacrimal glands, but anyway, they extrude the salt from the leatherback. So leatherbacks are constantly ingesting salt water, right? Well, they're eating jellyfish, and they get the salt out of their bodies using those glands, and they cry. That it looks like they're crying. It looks like they're tears that are streaming down their face. So sometimes you'll see them on a nesting beach, and you'll see people will say, look, the mother turtle's crying as she leaves her babies, but she's really not. She does not care. She's just extruding salt from her body, and the sand's getting stuck on it. And you'll see, if you look carefully at pictures of leatherbacks in the water as well, you'll see that same kind of you'll see the salt coming down through their tears, even underwater. And I'll just say one other thing. There's a beautiful painting behind me of a leatherback, and I have to give a shout out to our late friend, Dr. Nicholas Mursovsky, who was a professor at the University of Toronto and one of the first researchers on kind of typical Western science researchers on leatherback sea turtles. And he painted this incredible picture, which is actually quite famous in the sea turtle world. And it's of a leatherback that's nesting on a beach in French Guiana, which was his field site. And he left it to us in his will. So that's the picture behind me. Anyway, I'm happy to answer questions or.
Yeah, that was amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this evening. Really interesting to see all the work being done and getting to learn about sea turtles. And I know it's definitely very informative for myself. And we have some really great questions that came through the chat. So maybe we'll just try to see if we can answer a few of these. Paul Strom asked, how long will the satellite tracker last on the sea turtles?
So it depends. The ones that we are not interested in having them on sea turtles for longer than we need them. So ours last approximately a year. Typically, they end up getting knocked off during the mating process, and or they become they just get lost, or they become sometimes biofouled, which means that we'll be following a turtle. This happened with Red Rocket. We were following her, she's getting closer and closer to Columbia, and then all of a sudden we stopped seeing transmissions from her. And it wasn't that she'd lost the transmitter; it said epibionts and algae and stuff started growing all over the satellite contacts on the top of the transmitter. So for order for these to work, these saltwater contacts, there are three of them. There's 1, 2, 3, have to become dry. And once they're dry, it tells the transmitter to send something to the satellite. And if something grows on them, it kind of stops it from working. So typically we see them lasting about a year. And then they're also designed with corrodable links so that if for some reason they don't fall out, otherwise they will fall off. I see, Paul, you also asked the $1,000 question about leatherbacks traveling through the Strait of Canso, which is fascinating and also relevant to even this year. Yes, absolutely, probably. We can't say, but we do see leatherbacks in St. George's Bay, and we did again this year, every single year. And they get into St. George's Bay and they have a hard time getting out. And so we'd have to hypothesize that they would have gone through for sure had the causeway not been built. It's an interesting phenomenon, and I think also related to what we see. I don't know if you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a turtle that was found dead in the Bredor Lakes, a leatherback turtle, and there was just last year in St. Peter's Channel, there was a leatherback turtle in the fall. And so what we see happening is there are these these bays whose mouths open to the north. So when you're going into St. George's Bay or when you're going into the Bredor Lakes, and also the other place that happens in North America is actually Cape Cod, which is shaped in the same way. It's got this northern mouth to it, that once that switch kind of flicks in a leatherback that says it's time for me to go south, they go south. And if they happen to be there, they're going to keep trying to go south. It doesn't occur to them that actually they aren't getting anywhere going south. It doesn't occur to them in their cute little thumb-sized brain that they should actually have to go north in order to go south again. And we see this phenomenon where the turtles kind of ping pong around. We've seen it on their satellite tracks. They'll kind of ping pong around back and forth, eventually like this crazy game of pong, sort of figuring their way out again. Or we think that those might be the turtles that we find washed up, like the one that you guys found, is likely, in my estimation, one of those animals that just didn't get out in time and then died. I think that's what happened with the Bredor Lakes turtle. And Mike James, my colleague, sees this in Cape Cod. He's seen the phenomenon in person when he goes down. He does a lot of work down there in cooperation with the United States government. And he's seen how distressed those turtles are. And in Cape Cod, it's incredibly dangerous because there's so much fishing gear that's in the water there at the time the turtles are trying to go south, and you just get caught a lot of the time. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of people, talk about the causeway and how it might have affected different species. And unfortunately, I guess we just don't really know in this case, but very interesting question, Paul. And it's a question I often think about as well with other species, marine species. Let's have a look and see what else we have here.
For somewhat predictable patterns of migration, will we be able to use that to see the baby turtles during the post-nesting years? We just don't know. It's so interesting to me how little we know about leatherbacks, given that they've been here for 150 million years. Like, we know a lot about certain species, but leatherbacks are really elusive for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're pelagic, right? Which means that they spend a lot of time offshore. So they're kind of difficult to study in that way. But also you can't raise them in captivity. So other sea turtles you can raise in captivity, and you can learn things like life expectancy, right? How long is a leatherback supposed to live? We have no idea. We can't answer that question because no one can keep them alive in captivity. What happens, because they're such deep divers. And the other thing that's interesting about leatherbacks is unlike other sea turtles, after 150 million years of evolution, they have never figured out how to go backwards, which is kind of funny because that feels like a life skill, but also really I find quite beautiful because they live in an ocean where we know how to go backwards because we understand what a wall is, right? We understand that you can run into barriers that mean you can't continue, but they have these incredible continuous migrations, right? And there's no need for them to turn back or to know what going backwards is. This is what happens to them when they run into something like gear, right? They don't understand why they're being stopped. And try and continue to keep going forward. So the same thing happens when you put them in an aquarium. 100% of the time, they end up getting abrasions on their bodies because they they keep swimming ceaselessly forward, and they get infections and they die. So they can't maintain them in captivity, which means that we don't even know how long they live, right? Or how quickly they grow, things like that. The age at maturity is like predicted to between 12. Some people say it's between like 12, you're approximately 12 years old, and other people say it's like 32. It's like plus or minus a huge amount, right, in terms of error. So they're really we just don't know. And so this idea of not understanding where they go when they're young is really, I mean, it seems so like something quite simple, but just isn't something that we can answer yet. And that's also compounded by the fact that, or confounded by that shell, right? So if you have a hard shell, it's easier to stick things to it. So when I put a satellite transmitter on a loggerhead turtle, which has a typical hard shell, I can just epoxy that sucker right on top. But with a leatherback, you've got this shell that has all of that dynamic movement in it, right? Remember, it's got all those little tiny bones. And so, and also a leathery skin. You can't stick something to that. So there are all kinds of ways in which you can't kind of, it's not like you can take a little baby leatherback and attach something to it and watch it go. We're still really trying to figure that out. I mean, you make a really good point. We just hasn't been figured out yet, which I think is good. Like as a human, I think it's just, you know, if you think about all of the things that we see as human beings, it's good for us not to know everything. I think the second we think we have a handle on stuff, it's when we get dangerous, you know? So it's good that there's some things that are elusive. I think it's like a win for the turtle, you know? What is the process to rewarm the turtles? This is the other thing that Texas is looking at. It is so complicated to reverse the effects of hypothermia. So places like the Sea Turtle Hospital in New England are expert at it, right? And they do this every year really successfully. And they actually have a really charming program too, where volunteer pilots who need to get in their flying hours, fly turtles from New England down to South Carolina, North Carolina to have them released. It's one of my favorite things. It's like a turtle flying program. Anyway, it's really complicated because it's a blood chemistry issue, right? So if you warm the turtle up too quickly, you end up skyrocketing these potassium levels, which can lead to things like heart failure. So it's got to be a really, it's a delicate process. That's one of the things that we've had trouble with, right? Is that early on, when we didn't understand kind of how people would find the turtles and they'd immediately bring them into their houses to warm them up, and they would get warmed up too quickly. And then they'd call us, you know, which is totally logical that someone would do that. And I could appreciate why, but they just get warmed up too fast, right? And then in other cases, they'll be like, I'm not going to warm the turtle up too fast. And they leave it in the back of a truck, and then they drive in the back of a truck and it's too cold. Like it's a really hard thing to figure out. The people that were the DFO fisheries officers are, you know, angels from St. John who drove little Lexi to us, drove with no heat on for all the hours to get here, just to try and keep the turtle at kind of the ambient temperature till we could warm them up carefully and very slowly. So it's a tricky process. They're really not out of the woods in Texas at this stage, for sure. I think there's going to be a huge mortality issue there. I mean, largely because they don't have power, and it's really hard to control how quickly those animals are warmed. And then also there's just a spectacular number of them, you know, to manage. So one of the many things I love about the sea turtle community is that everyone will be pitching in, right? Everybody in that area will be there to help. There's another turtle hospital in Florida. There are experts, Canadians actually living in North Carolina, Matthew Godfrey, real experts on how to do this stuff, not to mention all of the experts at New England Aquarium, but they will all be there if they can get there. And COVID, of course, adds a huge other layer to all of this in terms of travel. But if they can get there and if it's safe to do that from a public health standpoint, there'll be all kinds of support. But it's a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Oh, someone had Nicholas as a professor at U of T. Karen, I would love to know what that was like. He was very charming for us, but he's also a typical University of Toronto professor in that he will always tell you what you've done wrong, you know? So you would publish a paper and then you get this long typed letter from Nicholas. I mean, eventually it was an email, but at first it was like literally a typed letter where he would be like, I noticed you published this paper in whatever journal. He's like, I'd like to tell you all the things that I think you might not have considered fully. And then he'd write this huge list of all the things you might have done wrong. Which he did not to be a jerk. Like he did it because he absolutely thirsted after the truth. You know, he felt that our job as scientists was to ensure that we were always striving to find out what was true. And so our job was then to say, I'm looking at what you've done. And because I care about you and I care that we're doing the best work here. He felt the urgency of what we were all trying to do. I'm going to let you know how I think we could improve it, you know, but you could also take it the other way. But I really adored him. Mrosovsky, Mrosovsky. Pat Hughley was asking that. I can probably, you can ask me, I can see if we can arrange to get a print. He's passed away, Nicholas, but I think his family has some prints that were made that we can ask about. Why did I want to specialize in turtles? I did not actually want to specialize in turtles. I happened into turtles by mistake, thankfully, right? And that's whenever I spend a lot of time talking to students about careers in marine biology and just life in general. And one of the things I always say is I was an English major, my graduate work is in the Brontes and modern poetry. And so I didn't actually anticipate doing work in marine biology or certainly in science. And I ended up doing this work. My husband was a sea turtle, has been working on sea turtle work. And I just started doing the communications piece of it because I'm a writer and I knew all about communications and how to talk to people and how to write newsletters and posters and all of those things. And the project just gained enough steam that we began working on it together. I was really interested from the beginning on, I had studied partially at Toronto, I had studied also peace and conflict studies. And that's, I think a lot of what we're doing here is trying to look at how you create peace in the world through sea turtle research. So if we're, peace building is part of what we're doing. So we're taking environmental issues that are contentious and trying to make them issues by which we can learn how to work with one another. So what happened before we started working with fishermen, now a lot more people are interested in doing collecting Indigenous knowledge, collecting traditional ecological knowledge from citizen scientists. When we first started this work almost 25 years ago, it was very rare, not nobody, but it was very rare to see that done. And certainly when it came to marine conservation and endangered species, what had been more typical was looking at fishermen as villains and saying, you guys are entangling the turtles, therefore you're bad. I'm the environmentalist, I want to save the turtles, therefore I'm good. And there was an awful lot of people feeling very confident and self-righteous. And what we wanted to do from the beginning was to look at how you could address environmental issues. First of all, from the position that everybody had some knowledge that was important, that knowledge didn't belong only to people who went to university, that didn't belong just to people who studied something from a textbook, that it belonged in the hands of all of us, that we all are knowledge collectors. And at first, part of our struggle with getting people to recognize the importance of leatherbacks in Canada was that we were collecting information from fishermen, some of whom were illiterate, some of whom didn't have high school diplomas. And so the scientific academic community was like, how can you believe that they can write a number down accurately? I mean, they were terrible, and so insulting to the fishermen. But we were able to show, because we had the numbers, because of course the fishermen were wonderful at keeping records for the most part, that they could, that of course they could contribute to science. So part of what we looked at was, how do we take an issue if we approach someone and say, you can be a person who makes a living fishing, and at the same time you can also be a marine conservationist. You can be both those things together. Those don't have to be diametrically opposed. So if you can think of yourself as both of those things, how would you then act, right? And so we're looking at how you can solve these issues, which are complex issues, and they're not just scientifically complicated, they're also extremely complicated on a human level. If I'm a person and I'm living in Venezuela right now, where I have a failed state and I'm starving, and I have a green turtle or some other source of protein on the beach, and my kids are dying, of course I'm going to eat it, and of course I'm going to say, harvest the eggs, do something, like save yourself. Like it's not cut and dried, right? How all this works. And it's all tied into economics and tied into tradition and people, right? And how we share what we have. And so what we're trying to do, and what was so interesting to me from the beginning, was how do we do these things in a way that promotes peace, and that looks at doing things collectively as opposed to in opposition to one another. And so that was really interesting to me. But also I love that I had no idea this was going to be what I did, that I would be able to do, know these amazing people in different parts of the world and get the chance to talk to people and to learn to care about the ocean. I wasn't a kid that was like in trees, like looking for bugs. I was in trees reading a book. I was like, not going to pick up the snake. I think that sometimes makes it easier for me to talk to people who are like me or who were like me, and to say, I didn't get why this mattered either until a little bit later. And that story too is so important in my life, because I had, when we first started this work, we had just got married. My husband was always on the road doing sea turtle things. And at one point I was just like, what's the big deal if this turtle goes extinct? Like, truly, what are we going to lose? It doesn't give us anything. We don't get food from it. We don't typically, like in our world, right? We're not really eating them. What's the value here to humans? And my husband just looked at me and he went, Kath, The world is not just about us. And honestly, I hadn't thought of the world that way before. And in that one sentence, everything shifted for me. And it's never shifted back, right? In one sentence, the amazing, the way that creation in terms of the natural world is built suddenly became, like three-dimensional and full color. It's like went into the land of Oz, because there's something tremendous about not being the focus of the world, right? There's something amazing to being just a piece of something, to be a part of the ecosystem, not the defining factor of the ecosystem, although effectively we are the defining factor. But, to have these pieces that are bigger than us, it takes a lot of pressure off. How do we steward something is a lot better than how do we control it, So it's a combination of all that stuff. And I'm so grateful that I couldn't pick what I wanted to be, because I would never have picked this.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how things just kind of fall on your lap and you just kind of go with it. And that's kind of what we've been doing the last little while with the marine debris issue. It kind of just fell on our lap, and now it's become a passion of mine and many others in the organization. And just by the way you talk, it's easy to tell how passionate you are about sea turtles, and it's been a really great presentation. I just want to know, if you come across a sea turtle here in Nova Scotia on the beach, what should you do? I mean,
if you could call us, that would be great. So we have a toll-free number, and I can give it to you guys. It's on our website. 888-729, 1-888-729-4667. I'll give it to you. Just call us. If it's a turtle that's alive on the beach, that's a really big deal. If it's a leatherback that's alive on the beach, it's inevitably dying, but it's still really important to know if it's still alive. They never survive once they land on a beach where they're not supposed to be. Like, so when they're up here, they're not supposed to be hauling up on the beach, and they only do it when they're really sick. Which actually is super interesting, because we had a turtle that hauled up in Risser's Beach on the southwest shore, or the south shore of Nova Scotia, and it was alive, and it got kind of stranded on a sandbar, and we all went down and we did this huge kind of rescue type effort where we were like in kayaks trying to get this thing as we're waiting for the tide to rise above the sandbar, trying to guide this turtle out. It took like 8 hours. We had to wait for the tide, and we finally get it out. And like 2 days later, it washed up dead just a little bit further down the beach. And it turned out Dr. Pierre-Yves Daou, who you saw in that kind of picture of the necropsy at the veterinary college, looked at it, and he was particularly interested in the brains of sea turtles, and would always do these incredible kind of take these little tiny sections of turtle brain, but he was able to identify that it died of meningitis. So one of the interesting things to look at when you're looking at endangered species too is not just these kind of global threats, because often you think of, oh, why is it dying, right? What's the big threat? What's the problem? Is that what's the range of normal causes of mortality as well? We had another turtle that was wasn't a cold stunned sea turtle, but it washed up near Port Hood. That was a loggerhead sea turtle randomly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is just weird. But and it had, and the vet college discovered this and did a paper on it. It's called a microsporidium, which is a little tiny microorganism that lodges itself in the muscle, and it feeds on the muscle and breaks the muscle down of an animal, and then the animal becomes more lethargic. In this case, the turtle also got pneumonia because, of course, it wasn't kind of able to move as well, and died. But what was interesting, it was the first recorded case of a microsporidium in a sea turtle, which, and I can't remember the whole train of thought at this point, but which was a sign of global warming. Yeah, it was just the fact that it was found there was linked, very easily linked through complicated veterinary science to global warming. So call us, go onto the website. I carry that phone, the toll-free line with me everywhere, 24/7. It's always on. So please, and we're always interested in more volunteers. We have wonderful ones that do our beach walking program. It's not super long or super arduous, but it's really very helpful.
You mentioned that fishing entanglements and fishing gear was one of the main threats to the leatherback turtle. So how do you know that? Like, is there numbers on how much are lost each year due to these entanglements? Like, how do you get this information, I guess?
How do we know that it's the fishing gear that's the issue? We know it because we find through things like necropsies. So we'll find them that they've died as a result of drowning in gear. We found them wrapped up in gear. We get fishermen who call us and tell us that the turtles have died in their gear. So we know that that's the primary issue here. And also because they don't come to land in this environment, there's nothing else that can really get them. So there's some evidence of ship strikes killing them, but it's unclear. It's very rare here, and it's unclear whether the turtle was hit by the ship and then died, or that it was dead already in the ocean and then got hit by the ship. It's a much bigger issue, ship strikes in New England, because Cape Cod's so busy. There's so much traffic, right, with ships.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would have never thought that, if there's a leatherback on the beach, that means it's something bad is going to happen. So I think it's really great to know that. And yeah, I'll definitely be passing that on to as many people as I know. I mean, the first time I've ever come across one was the one I reported to you, and it was a sad situation, but it kind of led into this talk, and I'm grateful for that. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
taking the time out to do this with us this evening.
And I will just say, hello, Laura. I just saw a note from you, two Lauras. One Laura who just wrote an amazing song on leatherbacks, which is Laura Newman, which I hope we can always send you the note when it's up on YouTube. And then also Laura Bartlett, hello, who I haven't seen in a really long time, but she was asking about getting involved outside of Nova Scotia, which is also a question. And we do have a number of different things people can do. We do run an eco tour down to Trinidad where we take volunteers to help on the beach in Trinidad, which is an important thing to do for a number of reasons. First of all, because you help Canadian turtles down there, but also because it's really, ecotourism is one of the things that keeps the turtles safe on nesting beaches. So if you can show that the turtles are worth more money alive than they are dead, local communities will try and keep the turtles alive. So we have that program. And then we have another program that we're launching, which is going to have people who are interested in helping do education on sea turtles to be able to do that over platforms like Zoom. So in their local areas. So to help people that might be interested in doing that, hook them up with some educational materials and some different people in their area. And then we can start giving more information out to more people. So thank you. Great question. Oh, sunscoop to the sand. Oh, nice. This is Pat talking about when she lived in Trinidad. Amazing. That's so cool. After she finished, help her push in the ocean. Oh, that's really nice. Did we get most of the questions? Is there anybody else that has a question that's left?
Yeah, I'm just looking through here. I'm not sure if Jessica wanted to ask any questions. She was part of some work down in Costa Rica. I'm not sure if she wants to. She's part of our organization. I don't know if she's still on the call or not.
And also Pat Hubley, I don't know if people can see that in the chat, was talking about when she was in Trinidad and her family helped a turtle that had a bad back flipper create their nest and lay her eggs and helped get her back into the ocean, which is pretty neat. It sounds like on Matura Beach, maybe.
Well, yeah, we went over a little bit on this evening, but we got a little bit of a late start anyway. But I did put your email in the chat, Kathleen. I hope that's okay. And just in case anyone is interested in volunteering or getting in contact with the organization. And I also put in the Facebook page as well.
Thank you. And also I see there's one last question. Laura was asking how COVID affected our work. It's been hard from a public outreach standpoint, and Laura Newman, who's also on the call, who used to work at our Sea Turtle Center for one magical summer, we've had to close that for the last summer and also probably this summer, just because it's too small for social distancing and for keeping people safe on the waterfront. And our in-school programming is switched to some Zoom stuff, but it's just, we've had to cut it back quite a bit, and we've not been able to run a Trinidad trip. So there's a lot of things that have happened in terms of our public outreach. We've been lucky to be able to continue our research. So our field research has still come forward. We were really very lucky because it's a small boat. We work with commercial fishermen as our captains. So we're just on a little Nova Scotia fishing boat. So it's easy to keep a bubble going in that respect. And so we were really lucky to be able to do that. The turtle numbers have been down for the last 2 summers, and kind of leatherback numbers in kind of a distressing way. You hate to get too worried too quickly, but the last 2 years have been among our lowest turtle years ever. So hopefully this year we'll see kind of an increase in numbers. The trajectory for leatherbacks is definitely a downward one, which is worrisome and something that we're always keeping in the back of our minds. So we can just keep focused on our work, right? So I hope to see you in Trinidad again soon too. Yeah, I'm sorry about that trip not going forward. It's a really hard for the people in Trinidad too, not to have the Canadians coming down and helping with the economy down there and also with the work. And there's a real environmental work, as I mean, all of you who know, because I know you're interested in or probably involved in it, is that it can get kind of lonely sometimes, we're like sitting there. I mean, even as you were talking about, Dylan, like you're just trying to keep everybody motivated to like get the garbage out and do all that stuff all the time and just keep focused on what you're doing. And there's something so important about support from other people, and we're so lucky to get it from people who send emails and come to things like this and do other things, in our Sea Turtle Center, and just feeding off the energy of other people saying you should keep up what you're doing is actually a really big deal. And in Trinidad, our friends there, they just don't have anybody coming down. And when the Canadians come in, it's really a big pick me up. This is what they've told us, a really big pick me up in terms of how they feel they're being seen for what they're doing, and to keep fighting the good fight sort of thing. So I feel very badly about that too. And we learn so much from one another. We also have a program where we bring people from Trinidad to Nova Scotia for the summer, and they work on the field boat and they work in our Sea Turtle Center, and they do work, and we learn from one another, and best practices and things like that. So we've had to cancel that program as well. So hopefully things will be back up and running really normally in this time next year.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate you taking the time this evening, and looks like there are many happy people in the chat saying thanks as well. And
and Brittany's on here too, and she's one of our nature seeker friends. Yeah, she's one of the people we work with down there. We miss seeing you. I just saw her name pop up.
Lots of friends in the chat today. So what we'll do is maybe just get you to share the phone number one more time, just so we can have that fresh in our minds. When what to do when you come across a leatherback on the shoreline here in Nova Scotia, report it right away. Because as you said, if they are on the shoreline, then that's usually a bad sign. Yeah,
and the other thing is, the sooner we get to the turtle, the better, right? Particularly if it's a live small turtle, one of the cold stun turtles. Time is absolutely critical. It's of the essence. Every minute matters. And then, like we thought, with the turtle that was cold stun in December in St. John, Lexi, if we'd had her like 2 hours earlier, or even 90 minutes earlier, it might've been a completely different story. So that's really important. And then even if you find them dead, the sooner the better, because if there's a chance of doing one of those big necropsies and really learning from those animals in that respect, the fresher the animal is, the better. So the one that you guys had, just a few weeks ago was too far gone for us to be able to necropsy, although Dylan did come in and collect DNA samples for us, which was really great. And the DNA set, we get measurements. We didn't get measurements because again, that one was pretty decomposed, but the DNA samples are really important. We keep them here, a set in the Canadian Sea Turtle DNA Bank, and then also they get sent to La Jolla, California, where they're maintained at the International Sea Turtle DNA Bank, and they're used by researchers internationally. The other thing to remember about sea turtle research is it's still relatively new, even around the world from a kind of recorded sign in a Western recorded way. So this doesn't, speak to obviously all the indigenous knowledge of sea turtles that has existed, but in kind of recorded traditional Western science, this is not even 100 years worth of research that we're looking at. So that's really small in light of 150 million-year-old species, but also just in general. So in Canada, we've only been looking at them really seriously since 1998. So all the information is important information, right? And we're collecting data that will be used centuries from now, to look at what happened with these animals and what was happening and what did it mean. And that DNA will be used for huge projects, right? And over time will be used. So you're helping to build kind of a really part of the global understanding of the animal. And I think that's a really big deal. And historically, it's a really big deal. So, and we are careful about keeping records and people's names associated with stuff. So years from now, somebody will read about you guys having helped to contribute the DNA, right? And have been involved. So I have the phone number, Robin, just above, if you can see that. Brittany's saying, what's the statistic for the season? Do you mean I'm not sure what you mean, if it's for cold stun sea turtles or not, which statistic you're looking for.
Where is the phone number there? I can't quite see it.
I put it in. Did it go? Oh, you know what? I direct messaged it by mistake. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
Sorry. No, I apologize, everyone. I didn't mean to do that.
We want to report the sea turtles. We need the number. We need the number.
Andrew alone. Sorry about that. And then
Perfect.
Mars is a maritime Marine Animal Response Society. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. Someone said, what does Mars stand for? And they're our good friends, and they take care of everything that's not a sea turtle. And if you call them, they'll call us about a sea turtle. So just like we call them about other things. Yeah, they're wonderful. And we all work together, right? So you'll get somebody.
All right. Well, I think that just about wraps things up for this evening. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out and join this coffee house. It was really, really interesting. It was great to see all the work being done by the Canadian Sea Turtle Network and Kathleen, and it's really appreciated. And if anyone has any last words for Kathleen, feel free. But other than that, yeah, I appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Yeah, thank you. It was such an exciting time for me. Thanks for your interest. And it's so nice to see some lovely familiar faces too. Thanks, you guys. Keep up the great work with all your beach cleanups and your debris stuff. It's really important.
Thanks so much. You too. It was really nice to get to meet you, and even if it's just on Zoom, we really appreciate the work you're doing. And yeah, have a good night.
Good night.